Hey guys, John here. I made a video about the RAM in the Switch, about the purported 4 gigs of RAM that were going to be coming in the Switch. Same as dev units, which is great. All the way down, it looks good. And I had a lot of people tell me that 4 gigs is not enough for a system. And this is really confusing to me because with the purported specs in this system, 4 gigs is more than enough for what it needs to get done. Now, I thought we could talk about a couple of things and we could kind of come up with the fact that RAM is not necessarily a deciding factor in how powerful a system is. For some reason, people are seeing these new systems with 8 gigs of RAM, you know, here 8 gigs of RAM for the Xbox, 12 gigs for the Scorpio possibly, and they don't seem to understand what the RAM is for or why you need it, or why you need 8 gigs. They don't seem to understand. They just see 4 and then they see 8 and they automatically assume that this system needs 8 to match this system. And it's not necessarily true. We don't need 8 gigs in a handheld. It just doesn't make any sense. I don't know any phones, even the new iPads don't have 8 gigs of RAM, and those are supposed to be very powerful units. I mean, the iPad Pro is very strong, but it has 4 gigs. What it's going to come down to is how fast that RAM is. But you don't take my word for it. Why don't we look at a couple games and we can talk about how much RAM that system had at the time. So let's move over to Uncharted 3 on the PS3. So let's take a look at that. Great looking game. You can see Nathan Drake looks good, of course. Scenery looks good. Just the overall game looks very cinematic and great. Runs at 30 frames. Perfect. Let's move over to The Last of Us. This one does have frame dipping, but I mean the game overall is one of the best looking games I thought at the time, and it's, you know, it's still impressive. You go back, play it, and it looks great. So great. How much RAM do you think the PS3 has? Go ahead, just take a guess. It has 512 megs of RAM. It doesn't even have a gig. It has 512 megs of RAM. And you know what's funny? The CPU has access to 256. And the GPU has access to 256 megs of RAM. In fact, the RAM on the GPU is directly on the GPU. So the CPU can't even use that RAM. It's stuck with 256 megs of RAM. I'm sure there's some weird things that developers did to take more RAM from here or there, but it's not unified. It's divided. If you look at the board, because I work on them all the time, if you look at the board, you'll see RAM modules around the CPU, and then you'll see 4 RAM modules on the GPU. So it is as divided as it gets. So that means that GPU is rendering 720p images for The Last of Us with 256 megs of video RAM. That's impressive if you think about it. Now, why don't we look at some other games? For example, here is Halo 4. Halo 4 is a good looking game too. I played a lot of it. I preferred 3 personally, but 4 was still good. And it looks great. I mean, Halo 4 is a good-looking game. Here's Rage on the Xbox 360. Another good-looking game at the time. I thought it was amazing looking. ID does good work with tricks and lighting and things like that and textures to make it look good. How much RAM do you think the 360 has? You pretty much already know at this point. It's 512. Granted, it's unified RAM, which means if the CPU doesn't need it all, it can shift it over to the GPU. So if the GPU needs 384 megs of RAM for whatever it's trying to do in the game, and the CPU doesn't need that extra RAM, it can move it over to it. That's great. But again, the entire system has 512 megs of RAM. This is why it was such a big jump to go from 512 to 8 gigs of RAM. Granted, there was a 10-year window there. You know, from development of 360 to when the Xbox One launched, there was over 10 years of development time for that. So, of course, we're going to make a huge jump like that. It wasn't a typical 5-year cycle. That's fine. But 8 gigs was a massive jump considering what the Xbox 360 and the PS3 were able to do with 512 megs of RAM. This is why it's such a big deal that the Switch only needs 4 gigs. It doesn't need 8 gigs of RAM. What would it even do with that much RAM? It doesn't make any sense. Again, I think people are looking at the spec sheets and they see that it's a 4 and not an 8 and they're mad. So, let's look at the Wii U. Let's look at the Wii U. So here is one of my favorite games on the system, Xenoblade Chronicles X. You know what? I don't even know if I'm allowed to show this. Well, let's find out. So here's Xenoblade Chronicles X. And I guess I'm not allowed to show that. Okay, so close your eyes, imagine Xenoblade Chronicles X. It's a good looking game. You know what, here's a picture. Great. The screenshot I'm sure will get everything across that I'm talking about, right? No, it won't. Nintendo. Okay, so there's that. I can't show that. What else can I show? I guess I can't show Pikmin. Okay. Am I allowed to show Bayonetta 2? Let's find out. Okay, I can't show that either. Okay, great. Here's another picture. It's a good looking game. Okay, so how much RAM do you think the Wii U has? It's 2 gigs of RAM. It's not a ton of RAM to a lot of people again, but if you consider that, it's 4 times as much as the 360. It's 4 times as much as the PS3. And you know what? It looked better, but it wasn't that much better. I mean, if you really look at the third-party games that share between them, games like Assassin's Creed Black Flag, Assassin's Creed 3, Black Ops 2, they didn't run much difference between the two because it was developed already for the 512 meg systems. RAM from one to the other doesn't make a lot of sense because, like, it doesn't make a difference. It really doesn't. And if you think about it, the new systems, yes, they have a pool of 8 gigs, but the games are only using 3 to 4 gigs of that pool because they have to save the rest of the RAM for operating system things that have to happen. For example, if you want to stream Twitch, that has to be dumped in the memory. If you want to snap to, that has to be dumped in the memory. If you want to do party chat, it has to be dumped in the memory. So it has to reserve this, or there would be a kernel panic and the whole thing would shut down because it would run out of RAM. So, you don't need that much memory. Trust me. The Switch does not need 8 gigs of RAM. It probably doesn't really even need 4 gigs, but they put it in there just, believe it or not, 4 gigs is a future-proof for a handheld at this point. I mean, okay, so the 3DS. We all love the 3DS. Great system. You know, for the screen size, yes, it's a crappy screen. It's 240p. That system has 256 megs of RAM. That's all. And I love playing games on it. Why does the number for RAM matter? I don't think anyone really knows. No one knows what it's for. Really, what you should be concerned about, is it DDR3 or is it like DDR4 RAM? That's what you should be worried about. Not if it's 4 gigs or 8 gigs. That doesn't matter, trust me, it doesn't matter. It's an ARM processor, which is a mobile processor. It's probably a quad core. It's not an 8 core like the Xbox One and the PS4. It wouldn't be able to take advantage of 8 gigs of RAM. They would probably not even use it anyway, so we would pay for 8 gigs and we wouldn't even use it all. But why would we do that? Why? We should be worried about bandwidth issues between the CPU and the RAM, but of course, the average mainstream person who sees these numbers does not understand probably what I'm even talking about right now. But the technological savvy people, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Bandwidth between the RAM and the CPU is more important than the number of gigs of RAM that we have. So, I wish I could show you Nintendo stuff again. That would have been cool to be like, here's Mario Galaxy on the Wii. Go look at Mario Galaxy 2. I can't show you. I don't think I can. Let me try. No, I can't show you that. Mario Galaxy 2 on the Wii is an amazing looking game. And do you know how much RAM the Wii has? This is funny. The Wii has, I want to say, it's 64 megs of RAM. The Wii has 64 megs of RAM. And it's putting that image out. What Mario Galaxy 2 looks like is great, and it's 64 megs of RAM for video. So it has 64 megs of video RAM, and that's it. And it could put out a 480p image, sure, which does not need much video RAM at all to do, but it still looks great. So, you know what, worry less about the specs of the Switch and worry more about the games, because they're going to look great no matter what. It's going to be a 720p image, or it's going to be a 1080p image on your TV. It's going to be Mario, it's going to look good. It's going to be Mario Kart, Zelda. They look fine. So stop worrying about the RAM. It's not a big deal. 4 gigs is fine. And that's my rant for specs for the Switch. Again, worry more about the speed of the RAM rather than how many gigs of RAM we have in the system. Also worry about the CPU because that's a big deal too. Looks like it'd be an X2 Pascal chip, which is great. That's powerful enough. The X1 was more than enough to power cars at that point, operating system in cars. X2 looks to be much stronger. So expect double the Wii U's performance in a handheld system. Awesome. And that's going to do it for my little mini rant there on the RAM of the Switch. Sorry, it went a little long. I've had so many people in message boards on YouTube, comments, everything, just tell me that I'm wrong, and I can tell you now that I'm not. 4 gigs is enough. Don't worry about it. Move on. Worry about games, peripherals, and other things that will actually affect the system rather than RAM. So, until next time, I'll see you guys later.